Hi everyone. So I've had these brochures sitting around for quite a while now, and this one is actually a really nice brochure for the original Jaguar XJS, and it comes in this almost sort of like 12-inch format, so it looks like almost looks like an LP. In fact, you remove the brochure from the sleeve like you would an LP. For modern people, that's a vinyl, but for me, they were called records or LPs. LP for long play, obviously. So, this would have been published in, just trying to see if there's any dates on it, publication 3294E, Jaguar, Rover and Triumph, as they were part of their own sort of little group of companies at the time, still owned by British Leyland. Anything at the top? Nope, nothing at the top to give us an idea of dates. Nothing here to actually date it, so I'm going to assume it is one of the original brochures for the original launch XJS. So really, it is a lovely brochure, very nice, emphasising on the car's grand touring credentials. Sorry, just move this belt goo out of the way. It's from a video recorder job I was doing. They seem to leave goo everywhere, especially when they've got sort of dodgy belts. So, in fact, what I'll do to save the brochure from being damaged is just pop this bit of paper down and put that on top. There we go. So, there is a little pull-out which gives you all of the specification, which means that they don't have to sort of constantly reprint the brochure, because they can just sort of change this internal, you know, this sort of little slip of paper which could be sort of popped in at the dealer, and it was obviously a lot cheaper to just sort of publish one double-sided piece of 12-inch record size paper than it is to do a whole brochure. But the one nice thing about this brochure is just the photography. It's very, very artistic, and sort of really emphasises the fact that this car was an aspirational lifestyle choice. What's also nice is the use of this sort of clear, I don't know if it's plastic or paper, but it's sort of very sort of, I think it's paper, it's sort of very clear, almost sort of grease paper type thing, which gives you basically a bit about the car, and then you turn it over and you've got this wonderful picture of the car itself. And when launched, it was a very divisive, I don't know, very divisive shape. A lot of people hated it because it followed on from the E-Type. But do you know something? And I'll probably get lynched for saying this. I prefer the XJS to the E-Type. I don't really like the E-Type, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think the XJS is a far more practical, far nicer car. I will get absolutely lynched for saying this, but you know, it's personal preference at the end of the day. I can see the appeal of the E-Type, but I prefer the XJS. I prefer the way it looks as well. And even now, it's still a fantastic looking car. It just looks like really like nothing else. You see an XJS, you know it's an XJS. And it's one of those sort of looks that's actually got better with age, and it's really sort of come into its own in the past few years, which has resulted in values going northwards, so to speak. So here we are with a nice double page spread or some shots of the car in various exotic locations doing various grand touring type activities. This gentleman is obviously with his partner, wife or mistress, enjoying a trip to the south of France, probably in their XJS coupe. And then we have these little sort of segments where you've got a series of squares, so 16 squares by the looks of it, where you have almost sort of like 4 well, in this case, you've got 4 squares there showing the vanity. It's very sexist, this brochure, showing the vanity kit that you get here, or vanity options that you get in the glove box, through to a picture of the car sort of sweeping along a twisting road, focusing on the Kent alloy wheels, which were manufactured by GKN, and then focusing on the interior with the comprehensive instrumentation. Then talks a little bit about the aerodynamic credentials of the cars, again with this clear sort of material. And a nice frontal aspect of the car itself. Very, very nice brochure. Really, again, emphasising just the car's sort of grand touring credentials. And just showing very affluent people enjoying a very affluent lifestyle for the 1970s. All very sort of Playboy centric in some ways, you know, sort of the gentleman here obviously lives a lavish lifestyle, you know, head of some kind of empire, some kind of business or something. His partner slash mistress slash wife next to him, driving the XJS, probably at its top speed on the where legally permissible. Possibly enjoying some sounds there from the radio cassette, the Delaunay air conditioning set just so. Generally enjoying the entire experience, and also the comprehensive instrumentation and comprehensive warning system. Bit of a first for a car of the era. And to be honest, there wasn't really much change on across the XJS range until the early 90s, when it had a very comprehensive facelift. But it remained unchanged from 1976 through to around 1992. That's almost 20 years unchanged. And I think it finally went out of production in 1996. I mean, it's a timeless design. It really is. Just the sort of the wonderful buttresses, the way that the sort of the rear sort of boot deck climbs up, gently arcs over and then comes down. It's such a wonderful design, such an evocative design, with the boot's huge as well, which is also quite useful. And these buttresses, they were apparently supposed to be for a mid-engine design, but that was decided against at some point during development. You've actually ended up with this. It does look wonderful. And then we have a nice profile shot of the car, probably doing high speeds somewhere. And the heart of the matter, the 5.3 litre V12 engine, pre-high efficiency. I was trying to work out what certainly what this is. I think that looks like a sight glass. That might be a receiver dryer, that might be some kind of pressure sensor for the air conditioning. But then you've got this pipe work here, which I don't know what that does. That's possibly a cooler of some description. Might be a transmission cooler, I don't know. That looks like an air conditioning line with an expansion vessel. That's the air conditioning compressor, obviously. Under there is an electronic ignition module. Buried down in there is the distributor cap. That's the coil, and that's the double throttle linkage there, which goes to here and here, which is both the butterflies on the inlet manifold. It's a very exotic design, and that inlet manifold didn't really change until the end of production of the V12 engine. There's the fuel filter in actually quite a serviceable place there. You can get to it quite easily. The thing that's really difficult is getting to these two front spark plugs. Ideally you have to move that air conditioning compressor out of the way, and indeed all of the other spark plugs are a bit of a pig to get to as well. But when you look at it, compared to the standards of today, it's not that complicated. You can still see the basic engine underneath, and you can, very quickly work out by just following the pipe work around what goes where. I mean, for example, it looks like we have this here, which looks like some kind of vacuum arrangement, which comes around down to here. I'm not going to lie, I'm not sure what that is for. There is a big wiring connector going into it though, so it's probably for something probably important. But yeah, it isn't as complex as you would first, sort of think. But I can see why people would have been put off by this when they sort of came to service it. Open the bonnet to be confronted by that. You think, oh my god, yeah, forget that. Got a bit about safety here. It did have rams on the bumpers, which was very much designed for the crash regulations of the American market. Looks like this would have been for the 1977 model year, which I think is a year after it was actually introduced. Actually, that's quite nice. If you get it just right, you get the outline of the car, followed by a picture of the car itself, which is quite pleasant. And that actually brings you to the end of the brochure. It's very short, but there's just so much to look at in sort of a relatively short, small brochure. I mean, the reason why it's so short is because it literally just is one model. There were no trim levels. It was basically the XJS V12. That was it. That was your car. I'm not sure if there were any options. I think everything was pretty much included as standard. Oh dear, yes, it had the Lucas Opus electronic ignition, also known as the Lucas Hopeless electronic ignition. I think that was dumped fairly quickly, certainly by Jaguar, and also by aftermarket repairs, and something more reliable was installed. Transmission was the GM400, which is, as long as you look after it, pretty much bulletproof. And the V12 engine itself, as long as you looked after it, it was a fairly reliable setup. It developed 295 brake horsepower at 5,500 RPM, 317 pound-foot torque at 4,000 RPM. And if you watch any of the, quite frankly, excellent videos on the Harry's Garage channel, you'll know that when he talks about his XJC V12 coupe, he describes the V12 as a very short stroke, very high revving engine. It's an engine that likes to rev, and judging by these power figures and the sort of high RPMs that they're developed at, you really can sort of tell that it was an engine that, with a very sort of sporting character, especially with that sort of peak torque developed, sort of pretty high up the rev range for a 2-valve per cylinder engine. Very sporting engine, sort of far more sporting than the Jaguar 6 cylinders, which seem to be sort of built and tuned more for the sort of long-stroked comfort, especially the 3.6 AJ6. That's a very under-revving, torquey engine, 4 litre even more so. But yeah, that is basically the brochure for certainly one of my favourite cars. I do have quite an admiration for the early XJSs. I think they're wonderful machines. They're not built particularly well. I mean, the build quality is variable in that sort of typical Jaguar British Leyland way, but the basic concept of the car itself is absolutely spot on. It was, well, I'm not going to say it was the right car for the time because it was released in the midst of a fuel crisis, but it was certainly the right car for the 80s and for the sort of affluent market that it finally found itself entering. Anyway, if you have found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.